everyone, this is BK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be some quick thoughts on the second season of The Last of Us and where the show can possibly go from this point after its overall conclusion. Now, there will be spoilers ahead for both this season and the previous season of the show, should just be where I'm going to this overall video, and you can check out my thoughts on the previous season and I'll leave some links within the channel. So to get straight into it then, and in terms of The Last of Us Season 2, overall I felt was largely underwhelming, very protracted, and despite some small openings for much more wider potential, the show never really uses that material I feel that it should have done. And much like Season 1, this show tends to meander too much, lacking any real pace or momentum, which again is an issue that you have with these type of post-zombie apocalyptic type of stories. Now, it was a bit more of a strange dilemma this time around because when you look at a surface level, there was a bit more going on in terms of this season and the events and the action and set pieces, but most of it proved to be insignificant. The story itself, which picked up years after Joel lied to Ellie about the infected and how many were cured within the Firefly setup, we see them now both settling in within the Jackson town, with Joel and Ellie not on speaking terms, which we find out later on throughout the season as to exactly why, when it comes to fruition that Ellie finds out why Joel lied. Now, of course, the major introduction here was the emergence of Abby, which leads to the second episode, which without question was the best, not only of the season, but also probably of the entire series itself. This is where we saw Jackson coming under heavy attack from a large horde of the infected, with the townspeople frantically trying to survive despite their best maneuvers and tactics to do so. And all of this culminated with Abby capturing and then murdering Joel in front of Ellie. And I think as an individual installment and episode, this worked very well. It was very action-packed and tense and dramatic, again evoking very similar memories as to what we saw with the classic Game of Thrones episode Hardhome. But it was a very compelling watch. Now, I still feel narratively that this would have been a far more stronger and more impactful episode had it happened at the season finale. Now, I do understand that this is sticking very close to the game, where Joel also was killed in the first couple of hours. But this is one of those rare moments where the source material actually got it wrong, and this would have been a suitable time to change it. But as good as that episode was, the show kind of descends into a much more simple revenge story. None of the characters within the Jackson village prove to be very compelling. In fact, they don't really feature at all after this episode, minus Jesse. And potentially more interesting elements such as finding a cure or Ellie's immunity. We see later on we get the vicious cult group known as the Seraphites. We then have a bit of a backstory regarding WLF, that's the Washington Liberation Front, a group of mercenaries in many ways, and we see their leader played by the always reliable Jeffrey Wright in the third episode, I believe. So there were potentially much more compelling aspects here where we could have delved far more into secrets and revelations and the much more wider universe. But the show simply doesn't do enough with any of these elements, and instead we get saddled with the Ellie and Dina relationship, and this is where the show at times really grounds to a halt. During their dynamic, if there is one, I just didn't care about them sitting together and playing guitar in front of one another, sharing more tender moments. In small doses, this might have been fine, but this type of elements dominated entire episodes, and it really sucked all of the energy and the pace that the show badly needed, and it just could have gone in far more interesting directions. Now, of course, seeing how Joel's death played out, any following revenge story could have been very powerful and compelling. But what doesn't help is having Ellie as the central protagonist, and she still unfortunately remains the biggest issue of this entire show. Now, I will continue to maintain that it's not the fault of Bella Ramsey in terms of her performance, as she is simply playing the role the way that she's been asked to. It is an issue that of the character and how it's been written. Ellie, unfortunately, still remains a very unlikable, abrasive, reckless personality, not somebody that you'd want to follow in any story. She's constantly impulsive and over-aggressive, and it just makes you wish that perhaps maybe the likes of the other supporting characters were actually the lead role. And I really can't see how the show can survive in terms of maintaining interest with viewers with Ellie as the lead character now that you don't have this presence of Pedro Pascal as Joel to counteract her more toxic personality. Now we did get the penultimate episode, which was an hour-long flashback covering Ellie's birthdays as both her and Joel within Jackson, and this gave us a much needed background as to why the two fell into disagreement. And overall, I suppose it was a decent to good episode, but again, you just felt it was insignificant at this point. We'd already killed off Joel within the second episode, so it really didn't matter what happened within the backstory. It just didn't give any more integral context. We then go on to the overall finale, which really embodied all of the issues within the show. Everything once more is needlessly dragged out. This is where we see Ellie separating from Jesse as they're overlooking the town of Seattle, and Jesse realizes that Tommy is out there coming under fire. Ellie realizes that Abby is based in the aquarium. Again, I'm not quite sure how she managed to deduce that. And once more, she lashes out at Jesse as he rightly points out that it's no good going after Abby when it's more important to save Tommy. But regardless, Ellie still goes out there on her own as we see the place being hit by a massive lightning storm in the darkness. I'm not exactly sure how Ellie was planning to achieve her goal where she could barely see what was going on, and especially where we would assume that they would be infected all over the place. This was one example where I believe the television show actually was inferior to the computer game, where you compare sequences. In terms of the raft in the show, it was very much put under darkness. You could rarely make out what was going on. How exactly could Ellie see where she was going or where she was heading, or even if she could survive in that very cold, rainy landscape? I'm not entirely sure. She lands on the village that the Seraphites are based in, and she ends up being captured. And luckily for her, she's conveniently let go as their village comes under attack from the WLF, where essentially she really should have died or indeed been taken further hostage. And this just further undercut the character of Ellie herself, that she really didn't know what the hell that she was doing. But we see her get back into the life raft and she manages to go to the aquarium. She locates Owen and Mel, which is a recreation of a very famous scene from the computer game where she asks them the whereabouts of Abby. They resist. She kills them both. We get a sort of intense moment where we see that Mel is pregnant and she's pleading with Ellie to cut her baby out. But again, because we've had barely any time to know these characters, the moment doesn't really hit the way that it does. And then we had the climactic moment where somehow, after reuniting with Tommy and Jesse, they go back and see Dina. Ellie was able to locate them within the same night. I'm not exactly sure how she managed to do that. Didn't know what they looked like or where they were located. You would assume that Tommy was smart enough not to have himself tracked. And we see that she shoots and kills Jesse and wounds Tommy. Before then, we coming into confrontation with Ellie and we assume that she shoots her, but then it cuts to black. And then we get the kind of end stinger, if you like, where we seemingly flashback to day one within a Seattle community where we see Abby overlooking a city. Now, they are following the game closely as shortly after Joel's death, as a player, you had to then assume the role of Abby and then you would go through and follow her storyline. So this is where they are heading in a supposed season 3, which I've heard will take at least 2 years before it overall releases. Now, previously I felt this would have been a mistake because just much like the game, many people were angered by Joel's death, so it didn't really make sense to follow the story of the person who killed Joel. But in terms of the show itself, it may actually be a blessing if they manage to make Abby much more of an appealing and at least more understandable character. I don't know, it may actually make the show a bit more appealing as opposed to continuing to follow Ellie, and it may bring a fresher new dynamic. I'm not sure. We will have to wait and see. But overall, like season 1, Last of Us just proves to be a very ponderous and just not very compelling story, despite everything that is there in terms of the potential. I just think the killing of Joel really sucked any of the more integral character development, and you're just left really with more empty protagonists to continue with the show, and I'm not really sure it's really worth that going ahead for any potential third or fourth season. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings when looking back at the second season of The Last of Us. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you have any other further movies, television series, or any other topics for the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd like to see me cover within the channel, then also let me know in the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.